And it was just the question asked, have you ever been angry with God? Have you ever doubted God? Have you ever had hard questions for God? And if you have you ever brought those questions to him? And if you've brought them to him, have you ever sat and listened to what he may have to say to you? And I was like, ew, awful question. Horrible, Nikki. Refused to answer it. 0%. And so I'm like, yeah, I've been angry at God. Yeah, I've doubted God. Yeah, I have questions for God. Yes, I've told God I was angry. Yes, I've told him my doubts. Yes, I've asked him my questions. I've yelled them. I've cried them. I've wailed them. Have I ever stopped to listen? Gulp? No, I haven't. I've told God all of these things and then gone about my day. Okay, let's fold some laundry. Let's pick up the kids. Let's do anything. But heaven forbid, listen to what the Lord might have to say back to me.
Wow.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Crucible Project Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jess Donovan, and I am on today with my friend, Nikki Lepore. I'm so excited to get to share her story with you. So hey Nikki, how are you doing?
Hey Jess, I'm good. How are you?
So good. So good. It is so good to get to be together. I will admit right off the bat that you are one of my favorite people and just love you and your heart for ministry and for God and all those pieces. But I won't steal your thunder in sharing about who you are. So how about you tell us, who is Nikki? Like, what do you do in life right now?
First off, Nikki feels the same way about Jess. You're one of my favorite people, and I love you.
Oh my gosh.
I won't steal your thunder. Everybody listening already loves you anyways. Yes, Nikki Lepore. I am originally from Las Vegas. We moved there when I was 9. My grandparents in the late 80s bought Graceland Wedding Chapel. And so we lived in the Midwest before that. And my mom didn't know you could live somewhere where it didn't snow. So it was like 120 when we moved there, or we went to go visit. My mom was like, this is perfect. So my dad tested for the fire department out in Las Vegas, and he was hired, and we moved there when I was in 4th grade.
Wow.
And I did not live in a casino. I went to church every Sunday.
No.
There was grass at my house. True story. We lived there until almost 11 years ago. It'll be 11 years this Christmas Eve that we moved to the Chicagoland area with my husband. I have a husband, Sam. We've been married almost 17 years, and he is a native of Las Vegas, born and raised, which is not a thing. He's an anomaly.
Wow.
And we have 2 kiddos. We have Jack, who is 13, and Charlie is 11. So I have a 6th grader and an 8th grader, 2 middle schoolers.
Ooh, a whole bunch of crazy, I'm sure.
A bunch of crazy. A cute dog that is like a baby horse. And I am a pastor in Glen Ellen, Illinois. I live in Wheaton, so the next city over is Glen Ellen. And I have been on staff at Parkview Community Church it'll be 9 years in November.
Wow, that's so cool. Man, so many things to jump into. Cool. Now, how do you move out to the Chicago area?
My husband and I joke that we turned out semi-okay growing up in Vegas, but we just didn't want to raise the boys there. We didn't want to raise our kids there. So we had looked at a few places, and my mother-in-law had gotten remarried, and she had moved to the Chicagoland area. So my husband had a job interview out here. He's an engineer, and he was hired, and we moved.
Wow, that is so cool. So cool. Yeah. Now, obviously, you are on the Crucible podcast. So got to know a thing or two about Crucible. So how did you end up getting involved with the Crucible Project?
I had one of my dearest friends. She is my right-hand lady. I joke. We have adorable coffee shop locally, and it's called My Half of the Sky, and women hold up half of the sky, right? And so it's an amazing organization started by an amazing woman. A lot of their proceeds go to women coming out of sex trafficking and refugees. Wow. And anyways, it's a super cool place. I joke with this dear friend. Can I say her name?
Come on.
Come on, Cassie Blast. Let's go. Heyo. She holds up half my life, especially ministry-wise. Mm-hmm. So she had told me about this amazing thing that she was a part of for quite a while. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but I, over the last few years, have had some significant trauma and loss in my life. And there was a retreat locally coming up that she really encouraged me to go to. Just really said, like, you need this, Nick. So, yeah, that's how I found out about it.
That's so cool. And I'm sure, being in ministry, being one who often puts on those experiences for others, was it a challenge for you to step into a retreat where you were able to invest in yourself? Like, how did that feel for you? I
was so excited. I have been doing ministry since the day I was born. I've done youth ministry and worship ministry. That was actually, honestly, I knew it would be deep soul work, right? Like, I knew I wasn't going for a spa day, but I was excited for nobody to know me, really. I was excited to step into a place where I didn't have to be Pastor Nikki or really good friend Nikki. I love being all of those things, but there's more to me than that. And even I may have felt more uncomfortable going and being able to do some soul work and some hard stuff with people around who already know me. So going into it, I was excited that I didn't have to plan anything. I was excited to just show up and be able to be who I was. And I trust Cassie implicitly. And she said, just remember, you trust me and this is going to be good stuff. So I really did come into it with a ton of peace and excitement.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Now, some of what I heard you say was how you were excited to be in a spot where you weren't known by anyone. Yep. And isn't that such a funny piece of, I can echo that also being in ministry, where we're in ministry because we love others so deeply, but there is this real part of when you are so needed by someone else, or I will say that again, when you are so needed by so many others, that can be overwhelming. So as you're in full-time ministry, as you're a woman pastor, what does that look like in your own life? Like, how do you find that balance of seeing others and loving others, but then also what does it look like for you to be seen and known?
I learned very, very early in my ministry career. And when I say early, like 19, through a process of stumbling and falling, right? Of falling off the pedestal that I had created all on my own and holding myself to expectations that some others held me to, but really nobody else expected me to be perfect. And I crashed and burned because I was 19. I wasn't a grown up yet. I was still a child and had a lot to learn. So I learned very early on that in ministry especially, I can only be me. Right? Like I have to be who God has called me to be. And I have to be transparent. I can be a mom and a pastor and a wife and a friend who swears sometimes. I can be. I too make mistakes and I too sin and I too have grumpy days and I too have stuff, right, that needs to be healed and processed and worked through. I'm 42. And a core and 3/4. Does that still count when you're 42?
Oh, totally.
Charlie, my youngest, him and I's birthdays, we are 6 months apart. So he loves to remind me on his birthday on July 25th that, like, Mom, you're 42 and a half. I was like, perfect.
You're like, thanks, I think.
Thanks, Char. And so at 42, right, being in ministry for a long time, I hope I am living into God, who God has made me to be, and not trying to put on a facade that I have it all together, that I know all of the answers. The older I get, the more I realize, the less I know, the less things I am, more certain about besides Jesus. I'm very certain about him. So yeah, really open, really postured. I've learned to set boundaries. I've had to, which I'm not great at still to this day.
Yeah, I hear ya.
But I can't do what God has called me to do and what he has for me to do in this season if I don't have some boundaries. And so even, for example, like Wednesdays, I work from home because being at a church, we all love each other. We have an amazing staff. There is no perfect church, believe you and me, but
100%.
Our staff really loves each other. And so that can mean at times when we're in the office, we get nothing done because we're catching up on one another's lives and ministries and each other's kids and praying for one another and, touching base and all of those things during the day. And so that's fine. And then I'll come home, I'll pick up my kids from school, and then I'll come home and I'll keep working. And then I'm not, doing their homework with them, and I'm not doing things with them. And so this year I really have dedicated to taking my Sabbath back. I have not been good at that in the past. As a staff, we have Friday and Saturdays off, but I always end up working on Fridays, whether that's in the office or whether that's at my house or whether it's meeting somebody from church for a cup of coffee. Like, that is what I get paid to do. It may not feel like work all the time, especially if it's somebody I'm just getting to know, which is always fun and exciting for me, but I have to have that time that is set apart.
Yeah, that's so good. And you're actually one who's challenged me in my own need to Sabbath, which I have taken on. So I will say that. Life confessions. We are not all perfect at this Christian journey, this ministry journey.
No.
So I can hear you in those difficulties of being in ministry, and Sabbath is a huge part of that. Getting to be real is a huge part of that as well.
Yes.
And being able to be free to be honest and not feel like you have to wear this facade, wear this mask.
Yeah.
So what has it looked like to invest in yourself well in ministry? And what are some spaces that you feel you haven't invested in yourself so well in ministry?
I love to read. My husband makes fun of me because Amazon is just constantly coming to the house with books. And I do have a book budget. So I think investing wise, right, always continuing to learn, even from people who maybe theologically I don't always 100% align with or agree with, but people I respect. I love learning from people who don't share my point of view, right, who don't have my same life experience. And in the same token, I can get stuck in there, and I can go so deep right into somebody else's journey or their thought process or their things that I'm not looking at my own stuff either. And so there's like a balance for me from learning and then learning too much. My counselor, she was like, I love to take baths. And so she just said, like, you can't take your phone with you, right? And you have to take like a fiction book that's not soul work. That's not like a spiritual journey. Like, get like a murder mystery and read that. Like, you have to have some downtime for your heart and your brain and your mind to just slow down. I think you do have to have friends outside of ministry, which can be very tricky and very hard. Because I love all of my church friends, right? And some of my church friends have become my best friends, but we still, go to the same church and do the same things. And
definitely,
I'm lucky. I have friends that I can, share openly frustrations with. Some of my closest friends volunteer, on my teams. And I do tell them, like, I get paid to be annoyed. You don't. I was let me do the annoyance, let me do. But I do think it's important to have friends that you can go out with and not talk about the next upcoming, church event. It's okay to have fun.
Yeah, I love your your wisdom in that. And the need is important to be able to be authentically yourself in your ministry, but also not let your ministry be you, if that makes sense. Like you are not defined by your ministry.
That's one of our core goals as a staff. We have core beliefs as a staff. And one of them, right, is that we are not what we do. And we get rated on that on a scale like from our peers from 1 to 5 twice a year. And we ask people to peer review us. And that's, one of them. As you see Nikki, in her comings and goings in her daily life, does she live out the value that she isn't what she does?
Wow. Yeah, which is a hard thing to take on, especially in ministry. And, as you said, where you have your friends who you'll get together with and you're like, this doesn't feel like work, but this is still work because though I love these people, it is part of my job. It's part of my routine. And so having that separation of, okay, am I still a valuable person outside of the things that I do for God can be a tricky place to walk in. And so I know even in my own life and my own ministry and performance and wanting to be enough, I often end up rating my own scale of whether I'm enough for God or not when, wait a second, like it was all about what he's done for me all along. So man, so many pieces there. But I want to jump ship to another topic. And this has been something that I've been inspired by you and your walk in for quite a while now. But that is your journey with grief and healing in that. And grief is near and dear to my heart as well. And unfortunately, and especially in Christian circles, can be one of those subjects that goes taboo or gets pushed to the side or maybe minimized. So would you just share with us your grief journey and what that's looked like for you?
I would. Thanks, Jess. No, I'm kidding.
The fun stuff.
The fun stuff. But it's the stuff that I truly believe that that we need. Right. And that God promises that he can take what the enemy meant for evil and he can use it for his good, for our good, right? And for his glory. And so
no lie, I literally was listening to that song today and just put a Post-it note above my desk that says you take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it to good. So come on.
And so sharing my grief story, I believe, is one of the ways that God does that, right?
Totally.
So as I said, we moved to Las Vegas when I was 9. My dad was a firefighter on the Henderson Fire Department, and he retired as a captain. When we moved to Illinois, he retired. I have the only grandkids on both sides. And so when I told my parents we were going to move to Illinois, my dad didn't even look at my mom. And he just said, I'll retire early and we'll move too. So we moved out Christmas Eve day and they were out here by that Easter. I have a brother who is 4.5 years younger than I am, and he was a firefighter as well, followed in Dad's footsteps. He was actually the second youngest firefighter to be hired for that department. He was a firefighter, paramedic. I was going to say, you can't see us. My brother, I joke, he was 6'2", thin and blonde, and I am 5'4" and chubby and brunette, for those of you out there who are wondering.
Total babe.
But I look like total. Oh God, I couldn't be one of those things, tall, blonde, or skinny. That's fine. And my brother and I, even though we're 4.5 years apart, right? Like he was my whole heart. And when I found out my mom was pregnant with him and she went to the doctor and I said, is it a boy or a girl? And she said, oh, well, they couldn't tell. And I said, did it have boy clothes on or girl clothes on? And I prayed every night for a baby brother, right? And what I was thinking, every dollar I would get, I would buy him like a little Hot Wheel car. And so when we moved out here to the Chicagoland area, my brother was, still in his firefighter career. And so he stayed back. When my dad retired from the fire department, he really, I think a lot of things started to surface, right? He had had a lot of trauma in his life when he was younger. His mom died of cancer when he was 12.
Wow.
She died very quickly. They actually thought it was pneumonia in the beginning. My dad never met his dad until he was 16. And so my dad was raised by his grandparents, who were very loving and kind, but it was just that generation where my dad didn't even go to his mom's funeral. He didn't get to say goodbye to her. There was no counseling. There was no therapists in our house. Jess knows we call them feelings doctors. I didn't get to go to a feelings doctor.
Yeah.
And then my mom and dad met my dad's senior year of high school, and they got married really young and had me on purpose, they say, within the first year of their marriage. So I have very young parents. My dad and I were 20 years apart. So,
wow.
And my dad literally saved lives for a living, right? As a firefighter, and, heroes see things that not even heroes should have to see. My remember my brother's first call on when he was 20 years old, they were the second on the scene of a house fire, and the first on scene were brought out just like a 2-year-old that was on fire, and put him in my brother's arms. And that little, boy died in his arms, and drownings and just horrific things. My dad was also in the Air Force and as a medic. So yeah, when my parents moved out to the Chicagoland area, my dad just started having a really hard time. And to cope with that, he started drinking. Alcoholism does run on both sides of our family tree. And we knew that growing up. And so my mom and dad became Christians right when I was born. And so as far as we know, they're the first Christians. I'm sure not. There was an aunt out there, right? Somewhere praying for future generations. But my mom and dad just decided, we're going to be chain breakers. And we're going to leave a different legacy for our kids. And so there wasn't even cooking alcohol in our house growing up.
You're straight olive oil, baby.
Yeah.
That's all we're getting.
And so, right, because they were like, if we don't drink, we can't become alcoholics. And it's not something to mess around with. But my dad started drinking after he retired. And they would go to wine and cheese hour as we got older and stuff. But definitely growing up, there wasn't drinking around. For my dad, I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know if the depression came and then the drinking, or the drinking, brought upon sad thoughts, which brought upon depression. But it's just cyclical. The drinking and then the sadness. And so he was diagnosed with severe depression and PTSD. My dad loved the Lord. He woke up every day at 4:30 and read his Bible. All the years of my life. He was a great mentor. He wasn't just a fire captain, but he was really these men and women's mentors, on how to be a good citizen and a good friend and a good dad. And of course, a good firefighter. And my brother too. My brother struggled with addiction from a pretty young age. Robbie had his own faith journey for sure growing up. And so, long-ish story short, my brother was going through a divorce in 2017. And my mom and dad just really weren't loving it here in Illinois with the high taxes and the long winters. And so they moved back to Vegas to be close to my brother and close to the sunshine, close to their church community that they had, for 30 whatever years. And my dad sought Christian counseling and sought help, through treatment centers and AA and through support groups and Celebrate Recovery, all of those type of things. Wow. My brother wasn't doing well either with in his addiction, and his marriage ended in divorce. Yeah, he really tried too, right? He didn't want this struggle. In 2019, in that February, my mom's mom was diagnosed with cancer, and it was very aggressive, and she died within 9 days. Wow. And so my mom was able to fly back to Minnesota and be with all of, her brothers and sisters, and they were all there as my grandma passed away. At that time, my dad was just struggling daily with alcoholism. She, was in Minnesota. My grandma passed away. She came back. My dad went into another treatment center. And really, I think at that point, like we had lost count, he had been in and out and had sought so much help. And it was hard being 2,000 miles away, kind of not being able to do anything besides FaceTime or text, but not physically being there. And then on May 10th, 2019, my mom called me to tell me that my dad had died by suicide. And knew that my life would forever be different. I say that I feel like my days would be less bright. It felt less safe without my dad in it. A death by suicide it's different, than a lot of other deaths. I remember I was out there. We flew, obviously back to Vegas for my dad's celebration of life. And my brother and I were walking, in a Whole Foods parking lot. And he just looked at me. He said, like, the way dad died makes it worse, right? Yeah. And I was like, well, it makes it harder because you're trying to put a rational reason to an irrational moment in somebody's life. My dad loved my kids. Like I knew my dad loved me. My dad, oh my gosh, loved me so well. Right. I say like, I didn't grow up questioning my heavenly father's love because I had an earthly father that loved me. Like the fact that God's love is unconditional isn't foreign to me. It's not hard for me to believe because my entire life, I had a dad who adored me and cherished me and loved me unconditionally. And then my brother really continued to struggle after my dad died. He sought, help and counseling too. I just don't know that he was ever fully honest either, with a counselor or a sponsor or anything like that. Within the midst of all of that, I had 2 major back surgeries. I had herniated my discs on both sides in 2018. And so in the fall of 2018, I had a back surgery to repair my back, and the surgery went fine, but I had a horrible reaction to my pain meds and I threw up so much after my surgery that I re-herniated it worse than it was before. And so my legs were numb, my toes were numb. I was in constant pain. I did steroid injections and physical therapy, everything I could do to not have to have surgery again. But I did have to have surgery again. So my dad passed away in May. And then in June, I had a second back surgery. And though the doctor said that the chances were very, very minimal, there was a spinal fluid leak. And so I was in the hospital for about 7 days. And then for about 6 weeks, I was on pretty strict bed rest and I could walk 5 minutes a day, which is basically you get up 5 times to go pee and then you're done on your feet for the day. We're done with that. So my mom was in Vegas. My brother was in Vegas. I had just had that second back surgery. I have the honor and the privilege of writing all of our women's studies at church. And so that summer was no different. We were still writing a study in the midst of all of this. I say Jesus and I got to wrestle a lot in my rented Lazy Boy recliner after my surgery. But I also got to dive deep into God's word, right? We were writing a study about the fear of the Lord, which, by the way, we're like, who's going to come to a study about the fear of the Lord? We're like, 2 people are going to sign up by mistake. Total side note, fear of the Lord, the working definition that we use that I love is to have the fear of the Lord is joyful, life rearranging awe and wonder of who God is and what he's done. Wow. And so when we have fear of the Lord, right, it rearranges our life when we look at who God truly is and what he's done. Wow. So we were writing that study, and there was many times where I would call my co-writer, Aleka, and I'd be like, I got nothing. Basically, all of this physical pain, this emotional pain, this grief, this doubt, right? Yeah. Because I know the God I serve. Yeah. I know his promises are true. I know that what seems impossible for man, my God is possible of it. I know that my God still performs miracles. And so the things in my faith after my dad died by suicide, when so many people were praying for him, we had seen so many miracles. I knew my dad had a personal relationship with Jesus and he loved the Lord. And so the things in my faith that I had clung onto all of my life that brought me comfort no longer brought me comfort, right? Like the thought, I know that Jesus is closer to us than our very breath. And I know that he is a God who heals. He is close to the brokenhearted. And I didn't know anybody more brokenhearted than my dad or who wanted healing more than him. And he didn't get it this side of heaven.
Yeah.
And the thought that Jesus was close to them as they decided to end their lives and took their last breaths, I felt it was cruel. It didn't bring me comfort. It made me really, really angry.
Yeah.
And so Jesus and I got to talk about that, right? Like I literally couldn't run anywhere because I was stuck in a chair.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of time to sit and think. And yeah, I thought all of this, right? All of this physical pain, emotional pain, my doubts, the darkness, like it's disqualified me. Like I don't get to do this anymore. I don't get to write Bible studies and I don't get to do ministry. And Aleka had to remind me that, this is God's study. And if he wants it written, he's going to give you everything you need to write it. Calm down. So he did. Our women's study that year, pre-COVID. Do you remember that?
Oh my word. Yeah. What is that?
Still 2019. So we get to say true pre-COVID. It was September 17th, 2019. We had our first study. My second back surgery went really well. Besides the spinal fluid leak, I had been wearing, just orthopedic tennis shoes for however long. So I got to wear cute, like little wedge shoes that day. We had over 100 women at our study. I think there's like 132 ladies that morning. It was so good, right? It was so good. And we had staff lunch. We barbecued outside. And then high schoolers are my first love. And so one of my old high school girls was in town from college and I got to go have coffee with her. I picked up my kids from school. My youngest had an acting class that day. So we went and got ice cream after that. Then I had a women's planning meeting that night at church. So my husband swung by the church and grabbed the kids, brought them home and put them to bed. I came home from my planning meeting and I was literally too jazzed on the day to go to sleep. After a big event,
you just wear wedges again. Come on.
I mean, come on. They were cheetah print too. They're really cute.
Oh, go off, queen.
And so my husband had a long day and he's like, I have to go to bed. And I was like, no problem. I am too jazzed on the day to go to sleep. I'm going to sit on the couch and we have these prayer cards that women fill out that the leaders can pray over. I was like, I'm going to sit on the couch with our dog. I'm going to pray over these prayer cards, watch a little Dateline because I love me some murder. Hey. Second time I've mentioned murder on your Crucible podcast. Someone's going to report me to my lead pastor.
It's a ministry outlet.
Right. We need to see more tragic things. And I remember literally sitting on the couch, big exhale. And I just said out loud, I was like, God, it was so good to have a good day. I had not had a good day in a really long time, right? I had had fun days. I had had moments that were so great. Charlie's birthday party that year was like a pineapple party. It was super cool. And, I had fun moments and cool things to do. But when somebody passes away, people say, I know this is a dumb question, but how are you? And you're like, wah, wah.
Here we are again.
And so I said, I learned how to answer that truthfully. I said, some days are good and some days are bad, but every day is hard. But that day, it was such a good day. And I was like, there is hope ahead, right? There is, light at the end of this grief tunnel. Cassie, my friend who invited me to the Crucible, her and I were just texting pictures of goats, when baby goats, when they faint, when they go, and they fall over. We just thought it was the funniest thing. So that night, her and I are texting these goat pictures, GIFs back to each other. And then my brother had gotten remarried very quickly after his divorce. And so probably 30 minutes after I'd sat down on the couch, I got a text from his wife saying that he had attempted suicide. And I stayed on the phone with her for the next probably hour and a half as they broke into their garage and transported him to the hospital until the time that they pronounced him dead. And so 4 months and 1 week after my dad died by suicide, my baby brother died by suicide. And I just remember my go-to was Jesus at that point, right? I remember even that night I woke up my husband and told him, and I just was like, Jesus is going to have to carry us. It was like, Lord, you're going to have to protect me. You're going to have to hold me up. You're going to have to because he was my favorite person in the whole wide world. He would come to visit and he would leave and I would like cry for days.
Yeah.
And my husband would always say, I'm sorry I'm not as cool as your brother. And I was like, I know, me too, right? Like he's just the coolest. Right. And it wasn't just going to be my grief. It was going to be the grief of my kids. I would have to tell them that Uncle Robbie was gone. Yeah. It was the grief of my mom, who within an 8-month time span lost her mom, her husband of 40 years, and her only son. It was the grief of a community. The Henderson Fire Department ruled Robbie's death a line of duty death due to work-related PTSD and trauma. I remember the next morning, I don't think we slept that night, but the next morning I said, I should probably call church and let them know that I'm not coming in today or maybe ever again. And my one of our lead pastors at the time, Dave, who was just amazing. I always joke, I called him to let him know I wouldn't be coming in. He didn't answer. So I texted, give me a call whenever you can. He called me right back. And he was out having breakfast with some men from the church. And you would have thought he was having breakfast with them at the house across the street from me, because he was at my front door, like faster than you can say boom. Yeah. And I just remember I looked at him and I just, my natural disposition is joy. Like I am, deep down a joyful person, very optimistic. And I knew, right, the sadness that was going to come after the loss of Robbie. And I just said, like, I'm far too joyful of a person to be this sad forever, and he's great. He has good trauma-informed faith. And he just said, he was like, your body's going to try to make sense of this, and it's going to try and tell you that this is normal, but it's not, this much loss, this close together is not normal.
No.
And my in-laws had been planning a Disney World trip for me and our family for like 14 months. And my brother died on a Tuesday, and we were supposed to leave for Disney on Monday.
Wow.
And so it was another question. I was like, do we go to Disney World? Do we not? I don't know what to do, right? That's what grief does. It just like freezes you. And everybody was like, if you can go to Disney World today, sister, go to Disney World today. And so I flew out that Thursday and I went to Vegas to be with my mom. I flew back into O'Hare International Airport on Sunday, and bright and early Monday morning, we did get up and we went to Disney World. I always say I'm going to at least write a pamphlet about grieving at the happiest place on earth one day. It was surreal and weird. And we didn't tell the kids at that time that Robbie had even passed away yet, because why tell them at that point? There's nothing that they could do or needed to know. And we went, I flew back in the next Sunday, back into O'Hare. I flew out 2 days later to go to Vegas to be with my mom and go to Robbie's celebration of life. My kids stayed home because it was just too much loss. His service is on YouTube. There's articles everywhere. And I just wanted to protect their little hearts from more pain. And then the next Sunday we flew back. So I say there was 3 Sundays in a row I was flying back into, O'Hare International Airport. And so this past September 17th was Robbie's 3-year mark of him being gone. My mom has since moved back to the Midwest that they loved so much. But she's just 7 minutes from us, and it's sweet to have her here. And I'm proud of her and the work that she's done. But very, very acquainted with grief, much more so than I would like to be.
Thank you. First, thank you for sharing, because I know it's a heavy load, and it's a hard journey to navigate and to travel. And part of what I appreciate about you is your honesty and realness and rawness in it, of especially where we come to terms with Jesus and grief, and where we come to all those things that we know to be good. Right? We know to be good news, but to sit there and go, okay, God's near to the brokenhearted. Well, I don't feel him near to me right now. So how do I make any sense of this? So what has it been like as you have journeyed in your own walk with Jesus, in grief, in trying to reconcile even between him and you of, okay, God, I think you're good. Like, I know you're good, but this doesn't feel good. Like, how have you come to terms with grieving with God?
First, I will say I have found out that Jesus is so much bigger and he is gentler and he is kinder than I ever knew. I spoke at both my dad and my brother's services, and I stood before thousands of people. And I said, I won't let what I don't know about my circumstances change what I do know about God.
Wow.
And that I wasn't going to dig up and doubt what I had planted in faith. And I believed those with every fiber of my being, right? But to walk those out over the last few years, the last 3 years, has been harder than I thought it would be. Songs that used to comfort me. I was a worship leader. I was in a traveling worship band, 180.
Yeah,
we were in Southern California. Maybe you heard of us. No. And so worship has always been my go-to. When I need a heart check, I can turn on a worship song. When I need God's truth, I will turn on a worship song. And even those were hard, right?
Wow.
Like I will sing of the goodness of God. That's a super big and popular one right now. And over and over and over again, it says, you're never going to let me down, as we sing songs like that. And I was just like, in that the goodness of God, it says, all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so good. And I'm like, and I look around and I'm like, but none of this, right? Yeah. None of this is good. And so sometimes I wouldn't sing, sometimes I would sit and just be quiet. I would let those tears roll. Singing the song, "It Is Well With My Soul." I would say 0% is any of this well with my soul. And I got to a point one Sunday where I said, I want to believe these again. I want to sing these and declare these with all of my heart. And of course, the church we were singing the goodness of God, and the line in there where it said, "With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God." And I was like, oh God, I can cling to that. I can make that promise. I can cling that with every breath I'm able. And it might not be every breath, right?
Wow.
But with every breath that I'm able, I'm going to sing of your goodness. Another worship song, right? You're bigger than I thought you were. My doubts and my fear, they do not scare God, right? He's not offended that I ask questions. He is not enraged by my anger. He's not disappointed that I have doubts. And I have learned, right, as I dig into, I love that I get to read God's word for a living too. But Jesus doesn't allow you, right, to teach on anything, even if it's a kid's lesson, or write anything in a Bible study, that he's not going to have you live out and flush out in your own life.
That is real life.
Preach. Yeah. You want to talk to 5-year-olds about being a good friend? God's like, guess what you're going to learn this week? You're going to learn how to be a good friend yourself. And I'm going to throw,
so true. So true.
Some stuff in there. And so as I'm doing that, right, and I'm watching the life of Jesus, what did Jesus do when all of it was too much? Where did Jesus go when his soul was overwhelmed? People love the phrase, God won't give you more than you can handle. Well, that's not true.
I laugh every time I hear that.
You're just living proof, Nikki. God won't give you more than you can handle. And I was like, oh, wow.
Let's
sit down. Let me tell you a little story. And so when Jesus was overwhelmed, right, he knew that the end was coming. He knew what the cross held. He knew he was going to stand in the way of God's wrath for us, for our sins. And Jesus took 3 of his closest friends, and he asked them to come up to the mountain, to his favorite place, and to pray and to fall before their face and to plead with God and to talk with God and to commune with God and to tell God all the things that he was feeling. And so what did Jesus do? He drew close to God and he drew close to others. And I have been the type of woman who in the past has just typically, if you are my friend, you're my very best friend. I just need one best friend. I don't have a ton of acquaintances. I don't need a ton of friends. But to watch the friends that have come alongside me in the last 2 years and showed up for me when I didn't ask them to show up for me, who showed up for me when I didn't want them to show up for me, who, left things on my porch and just, loved me. I've seen the value of friendship, right? And especially those who are closest to you who can show up at your house without being invited or being asked or even being wanted. And they're like, too bad I'm here. Yeah, you're not going to do this alone. And a lesson God has shown me too is I've been walking with Jesus long enough to know that away from God is never the right direction. And I had a friend, I remember I was leaving Chicago to go to Vegas for Robbie's funeral. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this again, how I'm going to get up in front of people. And I said, but what I do know is that I just want to show Jesus. I just want to give somebody hope, to know that there is help. She just said, you just need a sliver, right? Just a sliver of Jesus, in your heart. Cause I just said, it's so broken that I don't know how I'm going to even be able to show him. And that's, she said, just a sliver of Jesus. And so we always say in our women's ministry that with the slightest gaze towards him, right? You don't have to search. You don't have to look very hard, because God is already pursuing you and he's already there. And even in my doubts, God has shown me over and over again. Everybody loves to pick on doubting Thomas, right? That he didn't believe, and I'm not going to believe it till I see it, Lord. But something very interesting in that is Thomas, wasn't with the disciples when they saw Jesus. And so they run back and they're like, Thomas, you're never going to believe it. We saw Jesus. And he's like, you're right. I don't believe it. I have to see him for myself. And it was 6 or 7 days later when Jesus comes back and meets them. And what that shows about Thomas and his character was that even in his doubts, he kept coming back. Yeah. He didn't doubt and leave. Wow. He doubted and he stayed.
That's so cool.
And his reward was that he got to see with his own eyes and his own ears. And even Job, in the suffering and in the trials, the very end of Job 48:2 says, paraphrased, don't look it up and quote me. He says, I once lived, Job is talking to God, and he said, after all of this, I once lived by rumors of you, on crusts of hearsay, but now I have seen with my own eyes and ears. Now I know firsthand. And so I don't think I could have said that 2 years ago, 1 year ago, maybe even. My mom and I were talking the other day. There is a little bit of a switch at the 3-year mark. The first year is awful and your brain does a lot to protect you physically and mentally and emotionally. The second year, I think, is even harder because reality starts to set in. There's, all of those things that your loved one is never going to be at again. Even as something as small as a kid's Christmas concert is a little bit sad because my dad's not there.
Right.
Every birthday, my brother, won't be sending a funny video or FaceTiming in. He was larger than life. So his presence is just not there at things. And in the beginning, I remember one thing that just got me through is I just kept reminding myself, it won't always hurt this bad all the time. The grief still comes in really big waves. I wasn't planning on crying at all during this. I didn't even bring tissues into my room. And yet talking about them and talking about God's goodness, right? It moves me to tears still, but it isn't as raw. And I can see and I can declare that God is good, right? He is true to his word. And last year was a big turning point for me in my grief and in my relationship with the Lord. As I said, we write our studies, and there will be times where I'll get to a week that I wrote and I'll get to a question and I'm like, ew, that is way too personal. I am not answering that. I think it's a stupid question, Nikki, girl who wrote the study. And I'm like, ooh, Xing it out or whatever. And sometimes I'm like, maybe Jesus wrote that question. That's why I have no recollection of writing that. And it was just the question asked, have you ever been angry with God? Have you ever doubted God? Have you ever had hard questions for God? And if you have you ever brought those questions to him? And if you've brought them to him, have you ever sat and listened to what he may have to say to you? And I was like, ew, awful question. Horrible, Nikki. Refuse to answer it. 0%. And so I'm like, yeah, I've been angry at God. Yeah, I've doubted God. Yeah, I have questions for God. Yes, I've told God I was angry. Yes, I've told him my doubts. Yes, I've asked him my questions. I've yelled them. I've cried them. I've wailed them. Have I ever stopped to listen? Gulp. No, I haven't. I've told God all of these things and then gone about my day. Okay, let's fold some laundry. Let's pick up the kids. Let's do anything, but heaven forbid, listen to what the Lord might have to say back to me. Wow. And so I did that. Once again, I brought my hard things, my doubts, told God, like I'd said, that, brings me no comfort to know that you were near them and I don't understand. And it makes me angry. And then I sat and I listened And the Lord said to me, he said, I loved them too much to leave them. And I love you that much too. And with that, truly, it didn't change anything. It didn't bring them back, right? They're not magically here. But I saw the tenderness of God's heart. And I knew that I'm never going to have a rational answer for an irrational decision. Mm-hmm. But I know that God loves them and God loves me. And I can cling to those promises.
Wow. On
my good days and my bad.
Yeah.
On the days where I can sing of God's goodness from the mountaintops and the days where I'm not able.
Yeah. Nikki, that's so powerful. Oh man. I have so many thoughts and so many words and still could just sit in silence and all of that. It makes me think of sitting by the ocean, looking out and just thinking of creation. And I think of those last verses in Job where God's like, where were you when I placed the stars in the sky? Where were you when I did these pieces? And so I can sit there and go, wow, like I may never understand. And sometimes I feel okay with that. And sometimes I'm really pissed off that I don't understand. But I think of that song too, of if the rocks cry out in silence,
yes,
so will I. So
that was one of my songs that because number one, it's a really long song, which is great.
Very much
you can
so.
Cry to it in the shower for a long time. Or drive But I couldn't sing those words, but my soul could, right? Like, and if the stars were made to worship, so will I. And if, creation bows before you, because my finite mind is not going to understand an infinite God, because if it could, God would cease to be God. And if I had a God who I fully understood, who did everything I asked, who always agreed with me, then I have a God of my own making.
Totally. But I love that. And I didn't even think of this till now, but like the rocks crying out in silence is still worship.
Yeah.
Our silence, when I don't even have breath that I'm able to give in worship, my silence is still worship. That deep part of me that, man, I don't know what the reference to the verse is, but the spirit within us that groans too deep for words. Yeah. So when I and myself cannot even comprehend what's happening, there's that piece inside of me that is groaning too deep for words. And I believe that's that glimmer of hope that we're able to hold on to and walk in. But I mean, what a gift for you to even be able to say, like, yes, I trust God with my whole being. And I question God with everything in my whole being. And that both can exist and both can be free to have some air. I'm a youth leader. And so I spent last night on the couch with my senior high girls. And the question was brought up in the video study. How do you make sense of the good news being good when life is hard and doesn't feel good at all? My girls' rawness to say, like, this stuff really, really sucks, but like, I still know God is good. So one of them brought up grief and said, yeah, I can know that they're in a better place. That's awesome and all, but it really sucks for me on this side. And so for my 14-year-old youth girl to comprehend that was like, wow, you're right. Like, we can know God is so good. And we can also sit in the suck and go, yeah, but this is really hard too. For some reason, part of our Christian faith that I don't think was ever ours to own or walk in was that facade of like, God's good, so I'm just going to cover up this crap that hurts and keep walking. Like, that's just going to leave you more in the pit. So being able to say, like, yes, God's good, and this really sucks is a powerful, powerful piece.
And that's our sacrifice of praise, right? Like, people, like you said, you forget the rocks crying out too. And like,
yeah, definitely. And so just to know that both pieces are free to be seen and both pieces are lovable and are needed is hugely important. I mean, what a story. And again, thank you for sharing, because I know it's hard and I know it's heavy, but I think so many people are going to be free to relate. And another piece I wanted to mention, you were saying how you're this joyful person, how joy is so natural for you, how that's real. And I get that. Like, I have, so you can't see this, people, but I have joy tattooed on my wrist. But as I went through seasons of losing my own best friend, of, like just awful, terrible things, there was a season where I was like, can I just get this erased? And can I get this off of here? Because this does not feel joyful. When I learned the definition of joy being grace recognized, realizing that, whoa, like it may not feel happy, but maybe that's not actually joy. Like maybe that deep rooted joy is knowing that I can recognize God's grace in the really high places, but also in the really low places. And I see that deep joy in you too. And I think your joy is so much deeper now because you can reflect the goodness of God in some really hard places and go like, yeah, this is dark and it's solely God's light, like that's shining through me in this.
And the power of prayer. Pray for your friends, people. I said, one thing I learned in grief as well was I'm a pastor. So I believe in prayer and the power of it. I believe that God, that he hears us. But there were days, right, when I knew the only reason I was able to get out of bed that morning, make my kids breakfast, make their lunch, and take them to school and was because people were praying for me. It was nothing out of my own strength. Because sometimes when you're praying and praying and praying and praying and praying and praying, there's no results, or you prayed and prayed and the miracle you were praying for didn't happen, it can be very discouraging.
100%.
Especially loving, someone who struggles with addiction or mental health, who lives with those struggles. Those can feel defeating. And I can look back and know that the Lord hears our prayers, because probably the only reason I'm on this podcast today. Because somebody was praying for me.
Definitely. Yeah. Prayer is so huge. And as you said earlier, those people who showed up when you didn't have it, right? Like when you were like, I don't even want you to show up right now, but here you are at my door. So I guess I'm going to welcome you in anyways.
Can I tell you my favorite story of that?
No. Yeah, so go ahead. Cute.
So it was one day that, got the kids home from school. They're both still in elementary. So it's like 3:30. And after my brother died, after Robbie died, I couldn't even, the only place I could find like physical comfort and also what I felt like was soul comfort was in my bed, right? I didn't need to be in my bed with like the shades drawn and it all dark, but even like laying on the couch snuggling my dog, like it was just uncomfortable. And I didn't feel even like a nice warm bubble bath, no comfort there.
Wow.
And so I would pick the kids up and we would get a snack and I would go upstairs and I was like, if you want to come snuggle me and watch a show, mom's going to be upstairs for a little while. I knew that was unhealthy at some point. It was good for a little while, right? But even our good things can become not great things. So I'm upstairs in my room and the doorbell rings and was like, Charlie, can you get that, please? I was like, whoever it is or whatever it is, I don't want it.
Yeah.
And I hear him open the door and he just yells up the stairs and he's like, Mom, Esther's at the door with salad. And I was like, what? And so I come down and Esther has been in his class since kindergarten and he was in third grade then. And standing at the door is my favorite little Esther with just like bagged salad, like all in her hands, like 6 bags of salad. And I was like, what? And her mom, Rebecca, comes walking up and Rebecca is just a hoot. She's one of my favorite people. And she goes, hey, I know when I'm sad and when I'm in a dark place, I eat a lot of junk food. And I just wish maybe somebody would have brought me a salad. And she goes, so eat it, don't eat it, let it wilt in your fridge. She was like, just know that I love you. And her and I sat on my front porch and we just talked for a little while. Right. And it's just one of those things like, right. Just the power of showing up.
Having people with us. That's so sweet. Yep. And you're like, salad, 6 bags of salad. Okay, here we are. But yeah, she was with you.
Let them melt. I don't know, but
probably it's what I would have done.
Yeah, bag salad.
No, it was in good love.
People keep bringing me brownies. I'm going to eat those. But potato chips. That's my love language.
So true. So true. Here for it. Wow. That is so good and so sweet. And so I especially want to encourage anyone listening who, maybe are experiencing grief and loss or wrestling with some of those mental health struggles as well. Know that you are seen and loved in that, and whatever place that's in for you. And you are doing the hard work too. I know that some of what Nikki brought up was even for her brother and dad, they were doing work and still struggled. And so I hope that you can see grace in that. been in that spot and am partially in that spot right now where I can do my own work, but still wrestle and still ask God about his goodness. And so no one is alone in that. But yeah, keep seeking God, keep seeking community and people, and know that you are loved in whatever space you are in. And so, man, Nikki, I could keep rolling for, hours asking you questions because you are filled with gold and wisdom and nuggets. But man, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey with us.
Thank you for letting me.
Yeah, total gift. And I know that everyone listening will be blessed. So people, we will see you next time. Nikki, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Also, don't forget to check out myjourney2.com for your free 2-week trial. That's myjourneyto.com. Thank you for listening.